On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, Americans go to the polls with control of the U.S. Congress at stake. What could results mean for the world?
Keep America great.
And big American companies do show up in piles at the CIIE. An insider puts his finger on the pulse of U.S. businesses in China. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. The China International Import Expo, also known as CIIE, is on its second day. Over 3,600 enterprises from 172 countries and regions are attending. While the U.S. did not send any official delegation, U.S. companies still did show up big way. These include some of the biggest names among Chinese and the U.S. multinational companies like General Electronic and Boeing, Qualcomm. They're there to demonstrate their latest technologies and products. On the sidelines of CIIE, I sat down with Jacob Parker, the Vice President from the China Operations U.S.-China Business Council, to discuss the recent changes and his outlook on China-U.S. trade relations. Jacob, welcome to CGTN.
Thank you.
So, the Import Expo, we see delegations from all over the world, 130 countries and regions. Absence of American delegation.
Well, whether or not the U.S. government is participating today, a strong group from U.S. industry will be participating, well over 150 American companies. I know from our membership at least 30 are here. Many are presenting at the expo space, and they're also looking forward to the opportunity to engage with China's government, with many of the officials that may be a little more busy in Beijing, but while they're down here in Shanghai are interested in speaking with the business community, so it's a good opportunity for them.
The hosting of the first ever Import Expo by China, many around the world see it as a great opportunity for both China and the rest of the world to recognize the fact that there are solutions to the current trade challenges, and also countries and parties involved are making proactive measures. We want to remember that the first ever Import Expo is not being decided because of the U.S. trade war. It was being decided to be hosted by China much before the so-called trade war between the two countries. So how would you make of the significance of this event in terms of China showing to the U.S. side, at least, its seeking of solutions?
I think that the Import Expo shows a sensitivity in China to the recent concerns about the trade deficits that many countries run with the Chinese. It obviously offers an excellent opportunity for American firms and others around the world to export more to China. That should be welcomed by every country and every government. It is an opportunity that many of our companies see, and that's why they're participating.
If there are many opportunities to interact with the Chinese side, whether it's the business side or the government side, what would be the messages coming from you and your colleagues?
Well, the U.S.-China Business Council and our member companies are very interested in seeing a resolution to the current trade conflict between the U.S. and China. We've seen that the tariffs have created a significant amount of uncertainty for our member companies, whether it's investing in China or looking at what their next steps are in the market, or potentially looking outside of China. They'd just like to get more certainty about what the future holds. And when they speak to Chinese government officials, they'll be noting that they hope the two sides can come back together, can resume a dialogue that will help deliver some results and hopefully end the current trade conflict.
On the other hand, when you are having the opportunity talking to Washington, particularly those of the current White House and relevant department of the administration, what are your messages there?
Well, thankfully, our message is exactly the same to both the U.S. and the Chinese government.
When was the last message being sent?
We see the U.S. government frequently, at least this week, last week in Washington, D.C. We're in a very important phase of the U.S.-China relationship. We obviously have the two leaders that are going to be meeting at the G20. We would like to see China submit the final list of 142 items and its negotiating priorities so that they can ensure that the two presidents are prepared to have a substantive outcome from their meeting. And we continue to tell the U.S. government that preparing in advance, ensuring that perhaps an advance visit to China or a Chinese official to the U.S. may offer some opportunity to set up a successful visit between the presidents.
What are the responses you got from Washington?
Well, I think the best scenario is that at the end of the president's meeting, we see some kind of pause in any escalation of new tensions. As you know, the president has announced in the past that an additional $250 billion or so of tariffs may be publicly issued for comment. We would obviously like to see some kind of public announcement that that won't happen, at least in the interim. And then perhaps some announcement that the two sides will return to negotiations and work on some of the structural and trade issues that both sides have realized are more irritating to the relationship overall.
The two presidents did talk on the phone. However, it was right before the midterm election. Therefore, many wonder whether from the U.S. side it is more about the stock market than anything else. From your perspective, Jacob, to the American businesses, what are some of the messages you heard from the U.S. president particularly?
I think from our perspective, it's very positive that the president personally is now engaged in the U.S.-China relationship in a way that he perhaps has not been in the last 6 months. Elevating the dialogue from the minister or vice premier level to the presidential level ensures that there's no one that can overturn any decision that's made between the two presidents. And that ensures that perhaps we'll see a more lasting agreement. There's not going to be a negotiation between a minister in Beijing and then back to Washington, D.C., and then have different perspectives come to play. We'll know that whatever's agreed is final. I think from our members' perspective, the White House has consistently told us that there are real challenges in the China market, whether it's concerns about the role of state-owned enterprises in the economy, whether it's industrial policy and subsidies.
I understand, Jacob, in the month of September, your organization did a specific survey among your member companies that are operating in China about what do they make of the current tariffs, whether having an impact on their businesses, and secondly, whether they still have hope for the China market and what is going to be their relationship with the China market. Tell us about the numbers.
Sure. In our survey data, 90% of the companies indicated they would continue to invest in the China market in the following year, and that China remains among their top priorities globally. I think that the result of that is that our member companies continue to see China's domestic growth is very strong. They continue to expand their industrial footprint in China to access that domestic market. For those that export, which is a very small percentage of our membership, those are the ones that are thinking a little more carefully about what their next steps are in China.
A supply chain change takes quite a few years, to say the least, not to mention the cost, the human resources that goes with it. So when your member businesses thinking about their future global supply chain vis-a-vis the current political debate, what are some of their solutions back at home particularly?
So maybe I can give you an anecdote from one of our companies that I think helps illustrate this point. You're absolutely right that supply chains are very difficult to move. One of our members is a television manufacturer that does quite a bit of exporting to the United States. And when the 200 billion tariffs...
How much of their exporting is going to the United States, do you know?
Oh, well, let me say this. I would say that 95% of their product is exported from China and probably 30 to 50% is back to the United States.
Got it.
What they tell us is that when the 200 billion in tariffs was announced, they began to do their due diligence on other potential investment locations to shift their supply chain away from China. What they discovered was that the rest of the manufacturing capacity of the entire world combined doesn't meet the same capacity that exists in China today.
I see.
So even if they wanted to shift outside, they would have to at least contain part of their manufacturing here. What they also tell us is that there's an ecosystem that goes with television manufacturing. You need LED lights, you need plastics, you need glass. And developing that ecosystem takes significant amounts of time. And it doesn't exist in scale anywhere else in the world. So if they wanted to move their supply chain, they're looking at 5 years to a decade of time before they were operating at the same capacity that they currently operate in China.
This is a reality that businesses have to deal with, uncertainty, enormous amount of uncertainty. And they're going to lose money. Big way.
Not only are they going to lose money, but it's going to be very bad for the American consumer as well, because those costs are frankly going to come out of the pocketbooks of the average blue-collar American.
Earlier you told me about your suggestion of the organization to the U.S. side, establishing further communication before the G20 between the two countries so that the groundwork can be laid. How dangerous is it if there is no concrete, intense interaction from now till G20?
If there is not a concerted effort in advance of the G20, then that creates significantly more uncertainty for the meeting than probably we would like to see. In every previous administration, the negotiating points are negotiated months in advance of any presidential visit. And today we have less than 30 days before the two presidents meet. This is a real inflection point, and this is an off-ramp, one of the few off-ramps on the horizon that will allow for some resolution to the current trade conflict.
And it could have spillover effect to the other areas of the bilateral relations, certainly.
If things don't go successfully there, then I think the potential of future tariffs are very high. And frankly, the U.S.-China business and commercial relationship has always been the ballast of the overall relationship. As that voice in Washington is quieter, other voices, strategic voices, military voices are much louder. So we need to have a win on the business side so that U.S. industry can again build up that support in the United States for a more constructive long-term relationship.
My conversation with Mr. Parker at the CIIE is not limited to current trade relations between China and U.S. It also touches on how the World Trade Organization would function in the future and what will be the roles of U.S. and China in that regard. As the debate over the fate of multilateral trade goes on, Mr. Parker gives his 2 cents how American companies would make their decisions that will best suit them. About the USMCA, also about the CPTPP. However, the latter is not necessarily on the agenda. So what is the solution coming from the U.S. side? Putting pressure on everybody else?
Solution to what?
To the global trade challenges.
Well, I think that the administration has made fairly clear that they are in favor of bilateral agreements as opposed to multilateral ones. Our members would like to continue to use the World Trade Organization whenever possible and ensure that the rules-based international order remains intact. However, this president has indicated that there's concerns of the health of those organizations and that they're operating as fully and as beneficially as they can be. And I think that tariffs are one response that they're using to try and fix the issue. I had someone from the administration tell me the other day that when you're trying to fix a door, you may look for a screwdriver, but when you don't have a screwdriver, and you have a butter knife, that's what you're going to use to unscrew the screws. So I think his implication was that when you don't have the right tool for the job, you use the tool that you have. And in this case, that tool, unfortunately, is tariffs. And frankly, it has raised some attention in Geneva, and people are talking more seriously than ever about reform of the WTO and other multilateral institutions in response.
I just want to make sure, are you saying that your organization and the members of your organization would still apply to the rules of the WTO, no matter what has been the choices of trade from the administration?
So our member companies are supporters of the World Trade Organization. They continue to view it as the best method for enforcing multilateral agreements. However, they also recognize that it may not address the challenges that many of them face in today's world and market. It doesn't address digital and cybersecurity issues. It lacks any information generally on investment issues. There's not a lot on state-owned enterprises. So there's a recognition among our members that while they support the WTO and the multilateral system, they also recognize it needs to be updated and it needs to be reformed to address the challenges that businesses face today.
I understand that the WTO right now is in intense discussion among the member countries themselves about this update that you've been talking about. and they've been and are planning to host several series of discussions for the months to come. Is that the thing that your members are looking at?
Our members are certainly looking at it. Our members would have also liked to, if the U.S. had been part of the TPP as well, but unfortunately it didn't work out. So any agreement that helps raise the standards of the multilateral system is something that U.S. industry supports. It may not be 100% across all companies, but I would say the large plurality do.
Okay. On the one hand, the administration now look at bilateral. The biggest multilateral is only 3 countries, USMCA. On the other hand, American companies are operating worldwide in enormous amount of countries, just one company. What's going to be the relationship of the administration's trade choices vis-a-vis the businesses' trade choices? Jacob.
It's a big question.
It is a big question.
There's not an easy answer. I think it goes back to American elections and what the American people are feeling today. And unfortunately, for better or worse, President Trump was elected by an American population that perhaps is less open and optimistic about globalization than they were in the past. That doesn't necessarily affect industry, but for those companies that can produce in the United States and maintain a low rate of cost, then they may consider doing so. But the reality is that business will continue to operate for the benefit of their shareholders, no matter what government is in office in the United States or in China. They serve their shareholders.
Jacob, of course, the midterm election is going to have enormous amount of impact on the future of the U.S. politics and possibly how the current administration is dealing with the rest of the world. From the business community, how do you see the relationship of domestic politics and your operations worldwide and the success of American businesses worldwide?
Yeah. So when we talk to folks in the White House and in Congress, and when we talk to our companies, they tell us that the midterm elections shouldn't have much of an impact on how they operate in China. As you know, the House of Representatives, which seems to be the most likely to go to the Democrats, has very limited impact on trade or international issues. However, we do know that if the House is retaken, it will likely cause a nettlesome effect on the President and his staff, because more people will be called in to testify to Congress. It'll force them to focus much more attention on that as opposed to international trade or other policies. So I think the expectation is that that will be an issue.
Jacob, what a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for helping us understand the perspectives of U.S.-China Business Council.
It was my pleasure.
Appreciate the work that your organization has been doing over the past 40 years.